I am God's baby girl, a child of God. I am a heir of God and joint heirs with Christ. I am raised together with Christ and I sit in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. I sit far above principalities and powers. I am complete in Him, and my body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. I am made a king and a priest unto God, and I am the daughter of the King. Welcome to the King's Daughters podcast. Hi, people of the King's Daughters podcast. Hi, welcome. I'm so happy to be here after such a long break. So it's been a minute. It's been a while actually, and it's been a long while. It's been a long minute. Just anything like that. So I'm happy to be back, and we are starting season 3 as right away, actually, right away. But before we get into the topic or the subject of matter today, I would like to first of all start with an apology. Yeah, an apology to the Nigerians that are not living in Nigeria, and the worldwide audience. To be quite honest, your president will I say have declared her the president of the Nigerians living in diaspora, the King's Daughters podcast listeners of Nigeria's. How will I speak it? How will I say it? Please, you guys help me come up with a name. The president of the Association of the King Daughters podcast listeners. Yes, so she reached out to me on one of these days we were talking, and she was like, every time I'm only greeting Nigerians in Nigeria, that what about them? That are they not part of the audience? Are they not part of this listeners? That was that. I said, oh, Emma Bino, sorry, don't be angry, don't be annoyed. It's a slip of tongue, and I will definitely work on it. Don't mind me. Don't mind me. I'm not taking people for granted. All my international listeners in different parts of the world, Emma Bino, don't be angry. If you don't know what Emma Bino means, it means do not be angry. Don't be angry. Don't worry, it is noted and corrected. As your president has brought it to my notice, I will definitely correct myself. I will. Secondly, so why I took such a long break? This is the longest break I've ever had off the podcast, and it was actually because of some personal issues which I'm going to share. Not very personal, but it's actually related to the podcast. So when I first started this podcast, I did not really I got a lot of support, and but as the episodes rolled in and the days went by, it just looked as if a lot of things were not going the way I planned it to go. Like number of plays were dropping, because if you use Spotify for podcasters, you will see that there are number of plays that you would have for each episode that you drop. So as the days went by, the episode in season 2 especially, the number of plays started to drop, and it started to get to me. It started to affect me. Like, wait, am I the problem? Is it like no one is listening to the podcast, or is it that I'm not dropping the right content, or is it that I'm not supposed to do this? I started to doubt myself actually, and it started to get to me. So I just like struggled or like dragged myself through the like last 3 or 4 episodes of the season 2 of the podcast, because I was really affected by that, and I really do not know why I let it affect me, but it did. It affected me to the extent that I started to think if I was actually ever going to be able to do this right, or ever going to be able to, or if I was ever qualified to actually do this right. I didn't really have, I said there in the B2B, I called it excellence, which I know is a good thing, but in a B2B, do that excellence. I started to compare myself to others. I don't have a microphone. I don't have so much of good graphic design. I was really doubting myself at the point, and doubting God as well, because I was like, God, if you send me, why am I not getting enough plays? Why am I not getting enough fame? And exactly, and I let it get to me so bad that I was like, I think I have to just take a break. Another thing that was getting to me was the fact that I was comparing myself to other podcasters out there. Like, I listen to some podcasts, or I see some podcasts, I'm like, I start to think, what is it that they are doing that I'm not doing? Why is it this way? Why is it that way? And blah blah blah. And thing is that I let it get to me. I went on their pages, I listened to their podcast. I, in a bid to be excellent in my own words, as at the time, I was actually comparing myself to other people. And actually, I just came on to be honest here, because most times we always say these things like, don't compare yourself to other people, you're on your own journey. But to be quite honest, it is easier said than done, because really I did compare myself, no doubt. I compared myself. And thing is that I didn't factor in comparing myself is that, was that rather, these people have put in the work, they have put in the time, put in money, put in effort, and I was just practically starting. It's like maybe almost, maybe like 8 months. I started in July, so maybe 8 months plus, or 7 months, and hey, I'm here behaving like as even though I've put in 41 years of work. Like, it was so will I say annoying? It wasn't annoying. It's like I knew I should not have been doing these things, but I couldn't help my feelings, right? So sometimes our feelings just get way ahead of us and just like, come on, just do some things, and I'm like, oh, really? So, and I took out time at first. And then another thing that I thought was, am I praying enough? Am I actually, one thing that really plagued me, or that really questioned me, or that I was questioning myself about, was the fact that, was I putting in the right content? Was I actually qualified to actually put out content, like reading my Bible and praying, and so that I would be able to put out this thing. And I just feel like what you're saying may be trash, what you're saying doesn't make sense. If a seasoned preacher should listen to this, they would just be like, this is child talking and all that. So that was getting to me. That was one of the things that was really getting to me, and I let it affect me. And that's why I had to take a little break, which turned out to be, I think, a month and 1 week or 2 weeks. So in those months, I decided to just stay off the podcast, get on with other things, pray, and talk to God practically. So English, it's like before then, God had actually been reassuring me that this is not about a game of numbers. This is not numbers thing. It's not a numbers thing. This is actually an impact thing. So he taught me that it doesn't matter the number of followers I have on Instagram, the number of plays I get on the episodes I drop on whatever platform I drop it on. It doesn't matter the number of people that or how famous it gets. What this podcast is actually for is for impact. So if one person listens to this podcast and their lives are changed because of, or their life is changed because of this podcast, it's a win for me. It's a win for him. It's a win for the person too. So why should I let the fact that, oh, I'm not getting enough plays get to me so much? But I didn't refuse to listen. I didn't listen. Do you get? I did not listen. I actually did not listen, and I started getting, like, let it get to me so bad. So later on, I discovered that, oh my, this thing God was saying, I should actually listen to it. That these followings, this, when he's season, or we're in a generation where following, how much likes I get, how much comments I get, how much fame I get, how much attention I can actually get from whatever I post out there determines the success of what I'm doing. But that's not actually it. what it is actually is how much of impact are you making, how much of help has your content brought to someone's life, how much of help has this podcast brought to someone's life, how much of help have you been able to render through your let's say services, your content, your whatever that you're doing. How much of it has this been able, how much of help has it rendered to someone that is in need of it? So he taught me that if one person listens to it and the person is blessed and the person's life is changed, the person has a better understanding of who they are, or has a better understanding of what they've been called to do, have a better understanding of who they are in Christ, have a better understanding of God and all that's enough. That is superb practically. And then I was actually listening to a podcast, the Tribe podcast by Called Out Music. If you don't know Called Out Music, you can check him out. He has amazing music, and the podcast is superb. And he said exactly the same thing. He's a singer in the UK, and he was like, but he's a Nigerian. So he was like, he used to let it get to him so bad, and that God was actually teaching him that if I post something out there, if he posts like an Instagram, if he posts on Instagram and 50 people like it, and it doesn't affect them, it doesn't impact their life, he doesn't cause an effect, that is practically useless. There is no point trying to do that. There's no point in that. It is a fruitless thing to let 50 people like it and not have any impact. He said even if he gets 10 likes and those 10 people actually took on what he said, or took on, or that video starts them as at the point of their need, that it's actually enough. It's actually enough for him and all that. So that was one thing I learned. And that's one thing God taught me with this. And I just wanted to be honest with you, because you guys are my listeners, right? And we're real on this podcast, really. We're actually real. We are practically real. We are real, truthful than real, and talking about life in general. So that was one of the main reasons. And another thing is, I was so worried. I was worried about everything, worried about the graphics, worried about my sound, worried about my English, worried about whatever I said, I was worried about a lot of things as pertaining to this podcast. I was worried about it. I was always thinking like, how would I do this? Where would I get this? Where would I do this? Is it up to standard that I set up for myself? And really, that's not a bad thing, but I started to let it overshadow the real reason for this podcast starting. And I was worrying, and in the course of the break, God asked me, do you trust me? And I was like, yeah. I'm like, psst, is that a question? Yes, of course I trust you. Why wouldn't I? I was like, really, if you trust me, you won't worry. If you trust me, worry will not really be part of what you're doing. Because I read this verse I think it's in Luke, that said, which of you by worrying can add a cubit to your height? It means like, which of you can worry so much that it would increase your height? Nobody can worry up to that extent. So what that meant was that worry cannot create any type of result. There's no result worry can make. There's no point worrying, because it is a fruitless thing. It doesn't have results. It's so useless. It's just very useless. So I picked up myself. I read some articles. Don't let me exaggerate, maybe like 4 3. Before you say I read a lot of articles, it's just 4 3 articles I read on how to improve on podcasting generally. And I believe in excellence, and I know that God has called us all in his kingdom to excellence. We're accountable to excellence. Mr. Jinsei can always say that Excellence is the platform on which power is displayed. So excellence, like I really want that to happen. I believe in it, and I really want to put out the best out there, not just for God, practically for God, and for everyone else involved, you practically. So yeah, so that was one of the reasons why I was out, but now I'm back and I'm refreshed and I'm excited to start, because really season 3 is not even an exaggeration. I'm back refreshed, and there's not saying nobody can actually like go sing cocktail is chisty. There's nothing I can't like get, like I've learned my lessons, and really it can't really affect me anymore. It really can't. So yeah, that's I think I've changed my mind. You know what? I would okay, no, I won't change my mind. I'm putting my mind back. So yeah, so welcome back. Welcome back. So yeah, I even wanted to tell you guys something. So I want you guys to, my listeners, my sweet listeners, to come up with an ending phrase. It can be a phrase, it can be a song, it can be whatever you guys come up with, and whoever comes up with something first on Instagram, yeah, on the comments of this particular episode, the graphic, the design of this episode, like this episode on Instagram, whichever comes up with the whoever who's English, the comment that comes up first, yeah, the benedict. Let's call it the benediction. Yeah, let's speak English. The ending part. The ending part. We have a beginning part already, so the ending part that you guys will always want me to see when we're done. Someone should just go out there and just like. I don't think it's be fair to others though, but I would, the first person, you guys should not gonna be saying different things. So I will still, in fact, I'll still like check it out and know which one to pick. But if the first person who comments is superb, definitely I will pick it out. So I will be saying it until whenever, yeah, whenever or how long this podcast runs for, yeah. So now to the subject of today's episode. So today's title of the episode is, as you can already see, Get to Know the King. So yeah, this podcast is named The King's Daughters Podcast, as you all know. But it will not make sense to be calling yourself the King's Daughter, or the King's Daughter rather. Actually, King's Daughter, when you don't know who the king is. That's why this title is called, the title of this podcast is called Get to Know the King. Now, I was reading Psalm 93 one day. I was blown away. Let me not even lie. I was like, what on earth? What was David seeing, or whoever who wrote this psalm? Because it's not just David that wrote the psalms. So I went and I checked it, and I got this, that, see, the king is not just anybody, as I've always established on this podcast, right? It's the fact that the king is actually the king, and there are so many things roped to this king. It's because of this king the world stands firm and it's not shaking. Like that's amazing, because if the world is shaking no more, we all know that we'll not be here. It's because of this king that a lot of things are, and it's amazing, because the person who wrote this psalm went on to talk about how the throne of the king has stood from time, I think, yeah, and it says you yourself are from the everlasting past. Now we all know life began at Adam and Eve. That's where we know life began, where there was darkness upon the face of the waters. But he said he's from everlasting past. That's from before even he created time, before time began. That's when this king has been. And there's something that caught my attention here is that something that caught my attention here was the fact that there's a part that say hills melt like wax before your presence. Yeah, I think it's there. Hills melt like wax before your presence. Now, if you know candle, you know how candle burns and burns, and then the wax just comes rolling down the candle as the candle reduces. And that thing's very hot there. But like the fact that hills, not just hills, the big hills we see melt like wax at his presence. He said that the floods have roared like thunder. The floods have lifted their pounding waves, but mightier than the violent raging of the seas, mightier than the breakers on the shores. The Lord above is mightier than these. Like, it's amazing his the scope of his rule, of his reign and his rule. Because when we talk about kings now, we talk about the boundaries of where they start their rule from and where it ends, right? Like in the UK now, we know that the king is a king a king is only the king of the UK, the United Kingdom, King Charles III. But this king, the king, there's no boundaries to his rule. He rules over everything, not just the scope of or place. He rules over everything, and he's immovable. It says an immovable world planted by an immovable God. Now, the characteristic of the king that you would like to take on, it's like, okay, you are the child of the king. You should have characteristics that he has. He has an immovable characteristic. Like, he's sure, he's firm. It's not something that, I think it's uncertain. No, he's not like thinking that, I think I'm king. I think I'm the king of kings, or am I the king of kings? He doesn't think about it. He's so sure of himself. He's so sure of who he is that nothing can literally shake him out of where he is. And that's one thing that we as the king's daughters should take on, that there is no shaking of who we are. There is no uncertainty in who we actually are. We are who we are because of who we are. Because of who we are. Practically, yes, we are who we are because of who we are. I didn't really think about it like that. It says that God comes from everlasting past. God's royalty is nothing compared to earthly royalty. It's like the royalties on earth are learning from him, right? Because it didn't just come. They shall learn it from somewhere. Because when I was watching the coronation that happened, was it on Saturday? Yeah, 6th of May. Yeah, on Saturday. I was amazed at I didn't watch the coronation. I watched the balcony wave and some other things, and I saw some clips, and I was amazed, like the elegance and the respect and the, what else will I say? Just the whole scope, just the whole thing just looked so beautiful and nice. And like, this is just an earthly king. How much more the heavenly king, the king that is above that king? Like, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it certifies that God is king, but not just one random king, but one with strength. There's no king that doesn't rule with strength. There's no king that doesn't rule with power. He rules, and he rules sure. He rules, and he rules with certainty. That's one thing that we don't really necessarily have. We are always uncertain. We don't know a lot of things, so we decide to plan our lives like that. But really, when we know ourselves that, my father is actually very certain about who he is, I'm the child of someone, or of the king that knows who he is and doesn't doubt it one bit. He knows who he is. It's not something that somebody say, "Are you sure you're king?" I'll be like, think about it. Am I sure I'm king? Am I really sure I'm king? Am I even really sure I'm king of all kings? Like, it will even take someone to say, okay, am I sure I'm king? For him to not say, am I sure I'm king of all kings? Like, I'm the king over all the kings. Am I really sure? He doesn't do that. He's so confident in who he is that nobody dares. Like all of nature literally bows because he's the king. He's the king. And he has a throne that's so beautiful, and there's no doubting the identity of this king. He sure knows who he is. He knows what he's doing. His children would definitely not be confused. You take on characteristics of your parents, right? If not all, most. So if this king is not confused about who he is, if this king is not uncertain about who he is, if this king doesn't doubt his identity, I do not think we should, because really, we are our father's daughters, we are our parents' children. We can't really say that, because like I don't think your father doesn't necessarily has to think. He knows that he's powerful. His power is not dependent on circumstances. It is dependent on who he is. I think one thing that I saw in this passage was the fact that when you know who you are, you operate in a power that most people may not really understand. You operate in an authority that is unquestionable because you know who you are. So he's not somebody that his power is not dependent on circumstances. It is dependent on who he is. So because of who he is, he knows how much power he has, and he works in that power. Satan has never really been able to define or measure him or his abilities, because actually he made time. Eternity is where we say he lives, or he comes from eternity, or he made let's be he made eternity. And if eternity is what he made, it means that if he exists out of what he made, if I made something, doesn't mean I have to be there. I made it. So it's like he made time, so he exists out of time. And God is reliable, and he's so magnificent that words always fail to actually describe his majesty. His majesty is so amazing that words are like an insult in describing it. And yeah, I just want you to just imagine that this king is actually my father. This king that calms the storm. This king that floods or the oceans clap in adoration to. It's the sound that said that the oceans clap. The oceans clap. That's now how you know that oceans actually clap. The hills melt like wax before him. How amazing. And that's your father. And that's one thing you should take that. See, Omo, I'm not just nobody. I'm just anybody. I'm royalty. And I'm not just earthly royalty. I'm heavenly royalty that's not describable. And that's one thing that's what the episode is all about. And if you have thoughts, what are your thoughts? I actually want to know, what do you think about this the king? What do you think about what you've heard today? What do you think about it? And if you have any other things to add to it, I'll be willing to listen. You can drop that in the comments on Instagram. On Instagram, I think already, that's daughters_of_the_king_podcast on Instagram. And also you can listen on so many platforms. But one thing that you should never forget is the fact that the royalty of the king, of whose daughter you are, is undescribable. So till next time, bye bye.